Hey everybody, welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 Senate elections and where, as of today, I think these races stand. Please do take into account that this is a very rough estimate because we are over a year away from the actual election. In addition to that, things are very fluid right now. In the last video, which came out, I think, almost 2 months ago, I said Democrats had a better chance of holding Montana than Nevada. And at that time, I think that if you held the election on that day, that would have been true. Montana would have been bluer than Nevada because at that time, the Nevada Democratic Party was struggling. They have now dropped that chair, Judith Whitmer. She's no longer leading the party and have gotten more organized. So in this video, I'm going to say things that are going to change in a few months and are not going to hold true in November 2024, but are true, in my opinion, as of right now. So I just wanted to clarify that because I think the last time I said that, I got a lot of heat because people were saying, well, there's no way Democrats are winning Montana if they're losing Nevada, which I think in 2024 is probably true, but right at that moment in time, maybe not. So we're just going to fill out the safe Democratic states. These are the states that are going to go blue no matter what. There's not really too much to contest about most of these states. I do want to talk about a few of them because I think that they're, for the most part, not debatable, but I guess we'll talk about New Mexico, New Jersey, and Maine. So New Mexico voted for Biden by, I want to say 12 points in 2020. I'm probably off by a little bit, but I think he won it by something like that. And we're doing this in terms of margin just visually. So Martin Heinrich, who did win big in 2018, is going to win again. I don't know by how much, but for conservative estimates, we're going to say by under 15. Similar thing with Maine. Angus King could potentially retire. He probably won't, but either way, him or another Democrat will win by under 15. And then in New Jersey, Bob Menendez is the unpopular incumbent Democrat. He only won by 10 in 2018, so there's room for him to do pretty poorly, but I don't think he loses in a presidential year no matter how bad it gets for Joe Biden. Now, on the flip side, Republicans do have their handful of safe states. These states are, for the most part, like I said, not debatable. You could definitely make an argument for some of these, but the only one I want to talk about is West Virginia. And I say that because West Virginia is a state with a Democratic incumbent. Joe Manchin currently holds the seat, but whether or not he runs for first of all, he might not even run for re-election. And if he does, he's going to be in trouble. He's a Democrat, represents a state that voted for Trump by over 40 points. It's a presidential year. And, a lot of people forget the last time that Joe Manchin was up in a presidential year, it was 2012. And yes, Barack Obama lost West Virginia by a lot in 2012, but there was a lot more ticket splitting and the country was less polarized. We're in a more polarized time now. Trump's going to carry West Virginia by way more than Mitt Romney did in 2012. Manchin is out. I only put it as likely because I don't like to put incumbents as safe losses because, yes, they've won before, they can technically win again. But if I was a betting man, I would feel very comfortable betting all my money on Manchin losing. I will say that. Now, moving on to our likely Democratic states. There's only a couple of these. The first is Minnesota. Minnesota, a lot of people say is safe Democratic. But my point here is that if I'm going to be consistent with West Virginia, I'm going to be consistent with Minnesota. These are both states that have Democratic overperformers. Amy Klobuchar outran Hillary Clinton by 23 points. Joe Manchin outran Hillary Clinton by like 43 points. And so they do very well all across their states. But polarization is a much more prevalent thing in politics these days, and I think Klobuchar in a presidential election cannot overperform Biden by enough to win by more than 15. I think she wins by about 15, maybe a little more, but I want to be conservative for right now, so I think if I had to guess, as of right now, she wins by under 15, but it doesn't matter that much. Next state is Pennsylvania, and Virginia should be safe. I don't know why I forgot to characterize that. Pennsylvania is a state where Republicans are just having a really hard time. Right now, the leading candidate is Doug Mastriano, and if the name sounds familiar to you, it should be because he was the nominee for governor in 2022. Since he lost by such a colossal margin as running against a non-incumbent, it's gonna be pretty hard for him to beat a well-entrenched, very popular incumbent in Bob Casey, who won by I believe 12 points in 2018. Casey's probably gonna win by under double digits this time. If I had to bet, probably by 7 or 8. But he's gonna outrun Biden, and Mastriano is the worst candidate the Republicans can field. If Mastriano were to get the nomination, this race would be off the board. Republicans wouldn't even try to win it. Now there's only going to be one likely Republican state, and that's going to be Florida. Florida is interesting. I don't want to talk too much about it right now because I think it deserves its own video because it's kind of a special state. But what I will say is Republicans, I think, are overplaying their hand a bit. Their abortion bans are not going to be popular, but it's a red state. they did really well in November, and Rick Scott would probably win re-election, but just by a bit less than people are expecting right now. And so the remainder of these states are going to be lean states or competitive states. And so, as you'll notice, some of these states are more competitive than others. I think a state like Nevada is really close. A state like, say, Michigan is not that close. Michigan is a good lean Democratic state because I think it fits the criteria perfectly. It is clearly leaning towards the Democrats. Republicans don't really have a candidate to field. And in addition to that, the Democratic Party in Michigan has had a really good past couple of years. They won the presidential election, but more impressively, in 2022, they held on to the governorship, won all statewide row offices, flipped both the state house and state senate, and held on to their competitive congressional seats and flipped a seat the Republicans had held for decades in Grand Rapids. And so Michigan is a state where Democrats have all the momentum. Republicans are just taking beating after beating. Haven't won a statewide race here, I believe, since 2016. And so they're going to have a lot of problems in Michigan in 2024. It's on the board. They can win it, but they have a lot of better targets. They have other targets that I think are much more productive for them. And so as a result of that, I think they leave Michigan alone. Looks like Elisa Slotkin, with her basically running for Senate, should be able to take this Senate seat, I'd say by 4 to 5 points. The next state I want to talk about here briefly is Wisconsin. Wisconsin, I think, is a bit more competitive than Michigan. Both are on the board for sure. Republicans, I think, should target these states a little bit. But unlike Michigan, Wisconsin is a Democratic incumbent, Tammy Baldwin, and she won by 10 in 2018. She will not be winning by 10 again, that's for sure. But she's an overperformer. She does very well historically with working class voters. And Republicans are kind of in a bit of a pickle right now because their preferred candidate, Mike Gallagher, doesn't seem to want to run. Because again, I think he looked at Baldwin in 2018 and said, look, I can run against her in a bluer environment. I don't really want to try to do that. 2024 will be, I guess, less blue than 2018, but it's still not going to be a red wave year. Based on what we know right now, it's not going to be a red wave year. And so, to me, I think Mike Gallagher decides not to run. If he does, it might be a bit more competitive, but either way, Tammy Baldwin should be favored to hold on at this point in time. And so that is it with our lean Democratic states. It's the two twin Rust Belt states of Wisconsin and Michigan. And for our lean Republican states, there's going to be a few we're going to look at here. So the first would be Texas. This one to me is pretty obvious. And some people have been putting it in the likely column. I don't really think it's likely at this point. Ted Cruz is not popular. Again, like, people underestimate the power of Texas's left shift. Yes, it is a red state. It's going to be a red state for at least the next couple of elections. But it's growing. It's diversifying. And it's getting bluer every election without, any pause, right? Like, I know Republicans did fairly well here in 2022, but if you compare that even to 2018, adjusted for expectations, Republicans did worse. And so in that regard, I would definitely say Ted Cruz is vulnerable. He's favored to win. I'd be pretty surprised if he did not win. But at this point in time, it would be, I think, unwise to put it as anything less than lean Republican. Ohio is interesting, I think, on the other hand, because this is a Democratic incumbent. That's Sherrod Brown. He won by 7 in 2018, and so he is a popular incumbent. But I think when you look at the other factors, aside from his incumbency, it's really bleak for him. Ohio's a right-trending state. Tim Ryan really ran a really good campaign against J.D. Vance, and he lost by 6. In addition to that, we saw federally, Ohio got even redder. It was, I think, an R+20 state in the House races, and Mike DeWine won by 24 in the governorship. And so Biden will not lose Ohio by 20, but he'll lose it by probably 10 or 11 maybe. And can Sherrod Brown overcome that? It's possible, but he'd have to overperform by so much that it just, to me, is not, the scenario I would feel comfortable picking. And so it's really a game of, will Sherrod Brown overperform by enough to win? And the answer is he could, because again, in 2018, he outran the Democratic nominee for governor by 11. So if Biden lost Ohio by under 11, it would be in play, right? But again, the issue I have with that argument is that Sherrod Brown did, he beat Jim Renacci by 7, but Jim Renacci was not funded by the GOP. The GOP funded Mike DeWine in 2018 because they viewed that race as a toss, but he ended up winning by a couple of points. Jim Renacci was abandoned by August, and they were like, we're not winning, we're pulling out. The same way they pulled out, of Arizona in 2022. So I would say 1,000% Sherrod Brown's vulnerable, and I think as of right now, he'd be favored to lose. he has a pathway to victory, but I think his 2018 performance isn't enough to justify a prediction of him winning at this point in time. And so that leaves us with 3 toss-up states in the West. 3 of these seats are currently held by Democrats, and for starters, Arizona, I believe, is the easiest to characterize here. I believe it's tilting towards the Democratic Party. The state's interesting. We have what appears to be shaping out to be a 3-way race between Ruben Gallego, Kyrsten Sinema, and whoever the Republicans decide to run. To be honest, at this point, I think it doesn't really matter too much who the Republicans run, because it's likely going to be someone along the lines of a Blake Masters or a Carrie Lake or the sheriff of the county that is also similar to Masters, and he's an election denier. He is more on the right wing, and I think all 3 of those candidates would be a liability to the GOP in Arizona. Arizona saw a really impressive result in November for the Democrats, where not only did they win the Senate race in convincing fashion, but they also won the governorship. They won, they swept most statewide row offices that they contested, specifically Attorney General and Secretary of State. And they also did well in House races that they were not expected to do well in. They came very close to winning both the 1st and 6th districts, despite the fact that neither of those races were considered to be too competitive. But what I will say is that at this point in time, the Democrats in Arizona are looking good. Now, in a 3-way race, things could get complicated. Kyrsten Sinema could take away more votes from Gallego than expected, but based on her polling numbers, she's polling worse with Democrats than Republicans. She's not doing too well in general, and we might, we don't even know if she's going to run. So I would say Sinema, as of right now, takes away a good amount of votes from both parties. And either way, with Biden on the ballot, likely winning Arizona in a matchup against Trump, I think Gallego wins by, a point or so. And so moving on to Nevada, that's another state that I think is going to go blue very narrowly. And so, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I had Nevada going red last time I made my Senate prediction, which was, again, a few months ago, and things have changed. But I do kind of want to explain my position, because I don't want to be a flip-flopper. I want to make my opinion clear, because fundamentally it hasn't changed. I think Nevada's trending red long-term. It's very concerning for Democrats in the future, and I think a few decades from now, it's going to be a red leading state for sure. However, in the short term, Democrats have a few advantages, especially because in 2022, they won the Senate race, despite the fact that Republicans had a 5-point turnout advantage. Come 2024 presidential election, higher turnout from voters of color in Las Vegas, you'd expect Democrats to close the gap on the turnout advantage by a good amount. Thus, I would say at this point, Jackie Rose in favor to win re-election, although, again, another toss-up state that's going to be very close no matter what. And so that leaves our final state, Montana. Montana is an intriguing race. There's a Democratic incumbent here, Jon Tester. Tester is a very popular figure. His most recent approval rating, I think, was in the 60s, so he's doing very well. But the issue for Tester is that he does not necessarily, there's no indicator that he's going to survive the wave of polarization that's going to hit Montana come 2024, right? Because Tester last won by 3 in 2018, and it was a good performance, but he was in a blue wave year, and he was running in a less polarized environment with a presidential with presidential candidates on the ballot, more polarized environment. And I know 2024 might not be a red wave year, but it certainly won't be a blue wave to the extent of 2018. That's bad for Tester. Add in the fact that I think DeSantis or Trump, it doesn't really matter who it is, I think they win Montana by 13, 14, 15, 16, something along those lines. That makes it very hard for Tester to come in and win re-election. He'd have to overperform by at least 12 or 13 points. And it's possible. He's done it before, but I would not bet on it this time. So that's my prediction. Again, you'd have Republicans picking up states of West Virginia, Ohio, and Montana, Democrats holding on to key seats in Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and they would be unable to flip, maybe any surprise states like a Texas or a Florida. So that would put them in the minority. They'd have 48 seats, but not horrible. It would be winnable in 2026. It's just this 2024 Senate map is really, really brutal for Democrats, and I think long-term it's going to cause them a lot of problems. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next one.